Okay, so let's check out this article from The Hill. It says pro-Ukraine lawmakers make last-ditch effort to safeguard U.S. support. Basically, let's do everything we can to prolong the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and continue to funnel money to the military-industrial complex. Starts off, pro-Ukraine lawmakers in both parties are working to get key provisions surrounding U.S. support for Kiev passed into law by January, an effort to safeguard assistance that is under threat in a transition to a Trump administration and full GOP control of Congress. If passed into law, the Stand With Ukraine Act would compel the president to request ongoing military and economic support for Ukraine in its defensive war against Russia. Yeah, so basically let's try to hamstring Trump's ability to negotiate peace and not stop this conflict, which they say that this is just to give Ukraine leverage and bargaining power in those negotiations, but I say it's just to keep supporting the military-industrial complex. So it says the bill's goal is to help overcome increasing partisanship around the passage of supplemental aid packages. The legislation is bipartisan and bicameral. For any of y'all that don't know, bicameral just means it's in both houses. You have a bill in the Senate and you have a bill in the Congress, House of Representatives, and they're trying to get it pushed through. So you got in the House, it's being sponsored by Brian Fitzpatrick and Joe Wilson, Marcy Kaptur. So we got Republicans and Democrats. In the Senate, Dick Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, and Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina. And that's no surprises there. Lindsey Graham is one of the biggest neocon war hawks. You know, this guy's here. Let's look at this. This is Lindsey Graham talking to Ukrainian troops in 2017. See, this stuff goes way back before everybody, really knows about Putin launching his invasion into Ukraine. That's where people like to pick up the story. They don't like to go back to the coup that we supported in 2014, Victoria Nuland, all the political advisors, special forces people that we had there. Like the destabilization of this region goes back way before the Russian invasion. But here's Lindsey Graham talking to Ukrainian troops in 2017.
Awesome.
I admire the fact that you will fight for your homeland.
Я захоплююсь тим, що ви боретеся за свою батьківщину.
Your fight is our fight.
Ваша боротьба – це наша боротьба.
2017 will be the year of offense.
Рік 2017 рік буде ріком нападу.
All of us will go back to Washington and we will push the case against Russia.
Ми всі повернемося до Вашингтону і ми будемо відстоювати санкції проти Росії.
Enough of a Russian aggression.
Досить вже російської агресії.
It is time for them to pay a heavier price.
Час вже, щоб вони заплатили важчу ціну.
Our fight is not with the Russian people, but with Putin.
Ми боремося не з російським народом, але з Путіним.
Our promise to you is to take your cause to Washington.
Наша обіцянка – це те, що ми вашу боротьбу доведемо до Вашингтону.
Inform the American people of your bravery.
Проінформуємо американський народ про вашу відважність.
And make the case against Putin to the world.
І покажемо про докази проти Путіна усьому світу.
I believe you will win. I am convinced.
So that was Lindsey Graham talking, and then you see John McCain's over there talking too. He was another, before he passed away, he was another big neocon representative that we had that was all about basically intervening in any country that came along with the opportunity. And did you see Lindsey Graham, the way he was rubbing his hands together? It wasn't because he was cold. It's because he couldn't wait to get his hands on all that money that he's getting from the military-industrial complex and from all the resources that we're trying to seek to basically take control of in the Ukraine. He said that, and I think it was a Face the Nation interview. He said, we can't let Russia get their hands on these minerals and resources that the Ukraine's sitting on. They always want to portray Putin as this guy that wants to expand Russia's empire, but you don't see that same criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu and wanting to expand Israel's reach within the Middle East, even when his actions have now gone past Palestine and Gaza, and now he's, you're seeing attacks into Jordan, and we want to ramp that up and go into Iran, but you don't hear the, attacks on them about aggressive expansionism, but it is, Putin's going to be the next Hitler if you listen to them. But so let's get back to the article. So some lawmakers are working to transform the bill's provisions to amendments for the National Defense Authorization Act, a House aide told The Hill. The NDAA is considered must-pass, end-of-the-year legislation that authorizes appropriations for the Pentagon and other defense-related activities. Yeah, so they do an NDAA almost every year, and that's how they always, re-vote on things like Patriot Act and other, really authoritarian measures that get voted on, and they'll attach it to something like the National Defense Authorization Act. That way you won't see it as a standalone thing. So if they attach the Stand With Ukraine Act to the National Defense Authorization Act, well, if you don't vote for it now, they'll say, oh, well, they're not voting to support the troops. The military's relying on these funds and they're not voting for it. Well, maybe it's because you're going to do something like attach the Stand With Ukraine Act to the National Defense Authorization Act. Or they'll do the same. Maybe it's because I don't want to support warrantless wiretapping. Maybe it's because I don't want to support, unlimited authoritarian measures to the federal government to spy on U.S. citizens. That's what they do. That's what the government does. And you're always the bad guy if you oppose it. If you don't support Israel, it's because you're racist. If you don't support the Ukraine, it's because you want to see Ukrainian people slaughtered and you support Vladimir Putin's expansion of Russia. It's always sold like that. They say that you're an isolationist. Are you really an isolationist because you don't want to intervene with other people's problems and conflicts? Or are you an isolationist if you want to weaponize your world reserve currency and import sanctions on people? Think of all the people that were killed in Iraq due to the economic sanctions throughout the 90s. That's one of the things that led up to a lot of the anger against America in Iraq. So who's an isolationist? It's not clear yet if lawmakers would seek to put most of the Stand With Ukraine Act provisions into one amendment or file a few separate amendments. Other supporters of the bill said it should be brought up for a standalone floor vote. Just have Chuck Schumer bring it up and let's vote, Graham told The Hill. Of course he did. Either way, time is running out to secure passage of the bill before President-elect Trump, who is openly critical of how much aid the U.S. has provided to Ukraine, comes into office. Billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. The House and Senate have 3 more working weeks in December. Trump has pledged to end the war between Russia and Ukraine, saying he'll bring together Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to make a peace deal. Good, I hope he does. I think that's why a lot of people voted for Donald Trump, to be honest with you. While support for Ukraine in the Senate remains fairly robust, Trump's skepticism is shared by many Republicans in the House. It's not clear if House Speaker Mike Johnson would support putting standalone legislation on the floor, given that approximately half of the conference voted against a $60 billion aid package for Ukraine that passed in April. Also, passage of the bill could be viewed as constraining Trump's future moves on Ukraine and Russia. I don't expect we'll see anything before the end of the year, said Quigley. I wouldn't count on that. That's pretty common for the government to just ram through legislation near the end of the year, especially if it's not favorable. Wilson also said it's better to wait for Trump's return before moving on the legislation, but added he will push hard for the bill to be considered in the next Congress. It's not that the bill is not good. It is just that there is a deferral when you have a new Congress elected, a new president, elected a new majority in the U.S. Senate, he said. I think it's more crucial and more obvious than ever that war criminal Putin is not to be trusted. Again, they're trying to make the argument, frame it that if you're not in support of this, that you do support Putin, which is not the case. Putin is an authoritarian leader. He's not a good guy. But if you don't support Ukraine, then you support him. But Republican attitudes are trending away from Ukraine, and that's unlikely to change in the next Congress. In April, 112 Republicans voted against the Ukraine supplemental aid package, more than half the conference. On Wednesday, 37 Republican senators voted in favor of a joint resolution of disapproval, sponsored by Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, that aimed to force Ukraine to pay back loans provided by the U.S. So Senator Ron Paul, he's one of the few people one of our few senators and representatives that I like. I was a big supporter of his father, Ron Paul, and continue to be. And he still does a great job with his Liberty Report podcast, and I think spreads a lot of good information. Now, Rand is not Ron, but as far as anything close to libertarian representation in the Senate, Rand Paul's about as good as it gets. And Thomas Massey in the Congress. Those are two guys that I actually kind of like and support. And fortunately, they're both from Kentucky, so at least I got that going for me. Other than the fact that my other representative is my other senator is Mitch McConnell, which, by the way, I called Senator McConnell's office earlier today. Took about 1 minute, asked him to not support any part of the Stand With Ukraine Act. And I said if they attach any of it to the National Defense Authorization Act, I asked that he withhold support for that. And that's all it took. It was literally, I think it was a 47-second phone call. I looked at it because I wanted to mention it. It took me 47 seconds to call my senator and ask him not to support this. So for any of you that are listening that agree that we should not be supporting the Ukraine and we need to bring the conflict to an end, call your senators, call your congressmen, call any representative that you have and ask them not to support the Stand With Ukraine Act. That's all it takes is 1 minute. And if you don't know who your representatives and your senators are, you need to get online. First of all, that's a problem. You need to know who these men and women are that are making decisions that affect your lives. But you need to get online. You need to get their phone numbers. You need to get their emails, and you need to contact them. If you're unable to get their phone numbers, you can call the U.S. House switchboard operator, area code 202-224-3121, and they'll be able to direct your call to the proper representative. So, but you guys got to take action. If you all want this to stop, if you all want to stop this support to the Ukraine, this is where it's got to start. But it's very simple. And if we don't call and tell them what they want, and not necessarily that means McConnell's going to do it, but if I don't call Mitch McConnell and ask him not to support that, I can't say he knew. You know, for all I know, he's going to say, well, you know, I've got people that say that they support the Stand With Ukraine Act, and he's just doing what his constituents ask. But so if I never call, that's on me. We have to speak up, whether they listen or not. Before we can accuse them of not listening to us, we have to do our part as citizens and call our representatives. So back to the article. So Dick Blumenthal said passage of the bill could help put Ukraine in a better negotiating position with Russia, demonstrating bipartisan backing from the U.S. Congress. If there are negotiations, as President-elect Trump has said there should be, then Ukraine's position at the bargaining table should be one of strength as a result of gains on the battlefield and also support in Congress. So I think that kind of measure from Congress could be very important, he said. So that's further proof right there that if we were not involved the last several years, this conflict probably would have ended, because potentially Ukraine's position might not even exist. And if that was the result, that Russia, you know, beat Ukraine and took them back over, then that would have been the result. But now, how many billions of dollars has the United States borrowed so that we could loan them to the Ukraine? Because that's exactly what we do. Because if you look at our financial situation, all of the money that we're giving to them, we're borrowing. So we're going to borrow this money, add to the deficits, add to the debt, and pay interest on it so that we can fund the Ukraine, and that money can be funneled back into the military-industrial complex. It says, the bill itself doesn't authorize new funding for Ukraine, but it directs the president to submit budget requests to Congress on what amount is needed to execute the provisions of the bill. So it doesn't authorize any new funding, but it is going to, in the future, it's going to basically create a mandate that we're going to have to support the Ukraine. Some of the top-line provisions of the Stand With Ukraine Act include prioritizing sending air defense, artillery, and long-range missiles, armored vehicles, among other fighting systems. Oh, good. So we can, like I said, further give money to the military-industrial complex. The text of the bill also commits the U.S. to help modernizing Ukraine's security capabilities, spending more money into the military-industrial complex, strengthening joint military relationships, prioritizing excess U.S. defense article transfers to Ukraine, and fast-tracking foreign military financing sales to Ukraine. See, it's what it's all about. It's all about selling the defense capabilities to other countries. The bill's drafting is an attempt by Congress to codify the 10-year bilateral security agreement that President Biden signed with Zelensky in June, safeguarding the agreement from any effort by potential Trump administration to retreat from the commitments. Why? How about we make commitments to American citizens? Make commitments to take care of America's defense, not Ukraine. Other provisions include treating Ukraine as a major non-NATO ally for the purpose of transferring defense assistance. There we go again, NATO. How about we get out of NATO as well? Why are we in these entangling alliances as the creators of our country warned us against? They said, get out of these entangling alliances. They're a threat to our country. Reauthorizing the Lend-Lease for Ukraine, which would allow the transfer of U.S. weapons to Ukraine and allow payback at a later date, and supporting Ukraine in its reconstruction and recovery efforts. U.S. support for Ukraine is seen by its backers as indispensable for the country's efforts to push back against Russia's nearly 3-year invasion. See, again, they only want to go back to Russia's invasion. None of the stuff leading up. NATO's, the head of NATO saying that they're not going to agree not to expand NATO into Ukraine, which is one of the things that Putin said. He said, if you all will tell us that you're not going to expand NATO into Ukraine, we're not going to invade. And the head of NATO said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give you that guarantee. That's no different than, say, the United States being opposed to the BRICS wanting to build some type of military base in Mexico. We would have concerns with that. So Zelensky has warned against a disruption of the U.S.-Europe alliance that is held firm under Biden. So basically, he doesn't want to lose that cash cow. Zelensky and the other corrupt leaders of the Ukraine have been getting our money for years now, and they don't want to lose that. No surprises there. Says this moment depends, I think, on our unity in Ukraine, Zelensky said in an interview Wednesday with Fox News. And I think that what is very dangerous if we will lose unity in Europe, and what is most important, unity between Ukraine and the United States. So again, this is one of those relationships that really benefits just a few people, corrupt government officials in the Ukraine, corrupt government officials in the United States and the military-industrial complex, and leaves the citizens of both countries in a worse position than before.